Hi, this is Michael Waitze and welcome back to the Thailand GameChanger. See, I'm trying not to read either. Does that make you feel better? This show is focused on the driving forces behind the startup ecosystem in Thailand and Southeast Asia, produced by this amazing True Digital Park in conjunction with Michael Waitze Media. We have, and today it's going to be amazing, but today we have the most amazing, informative and insightful conversations with startup founders. You're already laughing. Venture capitalists and senior leaders from tech giants and governments, all recorded here at True Digital Park. Today, I am honored to be joined by Alexandra McKenzie, the Deputy Ambassador at the British Embassy in Bangkok. Alex, thanks for coming on the show today.
Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Really good. Good to be here.
That's awesome. So I'm very interested in this, but can you give us a bit of your background and let our listeners know, like, what is the path to deputy ambassadorship or ambassadorship in Great Britain? And is that something that you aspire to? You must be, right?
Well, you know, I'm kind of happy with my journey so far. We'll see where it takes me. But the important thing for me has always been doing just jobs that I really enjoy and jobs that I feel like I'm contributing something and doing something I feel is important. So whether that ends up in an ambassadorship, you know, whatever. But
fair enough. But does that mean, like, when you were a youngster, you thought about this path for yourself? Or was it just progressive? In other words, as you went through university, you went through high school or whatever, you thought this is going to be really interesting? Like, was your family involved in diplomacy?
No, not at all. My parents are both teachers, but I come from a sort of a mixed background. So my dad's Greek and my mother is German Jewish. Her parents were German refugees during the war. And so I kind of grew up being kind of pan-European. I grew up bilingual and very much then open to different things. And so I knew, you know, when I grew up, I wanted to, I mean, it wasn't even that I wanted to, travel was part of my life. Other cultures were part of my life, and I wanted to continue doing that. And I wanted to do something that I felt was really meaningful and where I felt that I could do something positive.
Right.
And so travel, other cultures, other languages, doing something positive, that all ended up for me being the diplomatic service.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in the UK.
Really?
But I was born in the US.
You were born in the United States. Where?
In California.
Where in California?
Near Sacramento, Roseville.
Okay. I was born in Lompoc, California. My dad was in the Air Force.
Oh, okay.
So I was born in an Air Force base, but didn't get a chance to travel as much as you did. You said your mother was German?
Well, my mother, she was born in London, so she's British, but her parents were German Jews.
And they escaped the Holocaust?
Yeah, they both left in 1938 separately and then met in North London.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow, I just got a chill.
Yeah.
My entire family are Eastern European Jews.
Oh, really? Where are they from?
I have no idea.
Oh.
My grandfather escaped from Russia, actually, when he was 7 years old.
Gosh.
Yeah, and basically walked across the continent, got on a boat, and ended up in Boston.
Jeez, who helped him?
He did it himself.
Seriously, seven?
And then made enough money to bring most of his family over.
Wow, that's
before
amazing.
the war. Yeah. So when I think about the issues that I face today, they all feel really small. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They all feel really small.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you've worked in Beijing, in Paris, in Berlin, Singapore, and now in Bangkok. Can you just give me a little flavor of what each one of those cities are like?
Yeah, well, they're all pretty different. I mean, there are some commonalities. I mean, the thing I like about my job so far is I've always worked in Europe and Asia, and those two places for me are just awesome. Yeah,
just
exactly.
Awesome. There's no other way to say it, is it?
You know, I mean, there's so much depth of culture and interest in history, but in such entirely different ways. And then you do have crossovers and connections. So, for example, when I was reading up before coming here, I found out that there was a Greek guy who was at the sort of, you know, center of opening up the Thai monarchy to sort of internationalism, you know, in the 18th century. That was new to me. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Not a lot of Greeks seem to get around and do that kind of thing. You know, always on boats going somewhere, but that was news to me. So there are always these connections. I mean, Beijing, I was there like 2004 to 2007, and it was just before the Olympics.
Right.
So it was a really interesting time because there was old Beijing, and it was just in the process of being turned into kind of new Beijing.
Right.
So a lot of the stuff while I was there was kind of torn down and replaced with shiny things and new parks being planted and stuff. It was a bit like in, you know, Alice in Wonderland, painting the roses really quickly, making everything look really pretty.
Right.
And then Paris is Paris. But it was amazing to be there and see Paris being Paris. And Berlin I absolutely loved because of that history and culture, that connection as well. Right. You know, it's such a fascinating place to be because you can see all the history just there. You know, it's like sedimentary rock. You know, the road I lived on had you know, bullet holes in the buildings from the war still, and I lived opposite Mauer Park, you know, where the wall used to go through. So that was just every day, and it's also just a really fun place to be.
You speak German, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just really curious. We talked about it a little bit offline, right? So I lived in Japan for 22 years. I speak Japanese. I think it's really important that Because I believe that language is embedded in the culture is embedded in language and in food.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you don't eat the local food, you're like, oh, I'm not going to try that. Then you're not really experiencing the culture, even if you have a bunch of German or Thai or Italian friends, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the language.
Yeah.
I really believe if you can't communicate like in the local language, you're losing the depth and the subtleties and the nuance, right?
You just don't understand.
You don't
and you
know.
can't understand.
And all the things that are going on around you, you're just like, huh?
Yeah.
Kind of thing, right?
Although in a converse way, I also really like that beginning of a posting for me, and it's usually a posting for me where I don't understand things. And that kind of, it's almost like a silence. It's like meditative because there's stuff going on around you, but it's all white noise. And then slowly you tune into stuff.
You start picking it up, right?
Yeah.
I love learning languages, and I approach learning language like I'm a baby. Right, and I always say to people, because they say, well, Japanese is hard or Thai is hard, and I always say it wasn't hard for you, and you learned it when you were 2.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
anyway, I think language is really important.
I agree with you. And I liked what you said about food as well. So the last couple of days, I've cooked latkes, I've cooked mince pies from scratch, my own pastry.
Latkes from scratch.
Latkes, mince pies, and then yesterday I made melomakarona, which are Greek honey cakes, Christmas honey cakes. So, again, coming from lots of cultures, there's a lot of cooking to do, right? But it does. It connects you to your past and your family.
But it also gives you a great perspective. Right, so I find if you're in the diplomatic business, understanding all these different cultures gives you a much better perspective on sort of, what's the right word, collaboration, communication, and just figuring out ways to work together as opposed to ways to work apart. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
You know what I mean? So multicultural people, I think, should make much better ambassadors or deputy ambassadors. Don't you think so?
I do think so. And our foreign office has changed so much. Like when I joined it, it really was a bunch of old white guys.
Believe me, it's not just yours.
But it's so different now. It's really different. I mean, there are women ambassadors in some of our most important positions around the world. There are people from mixed backgrounds, different backgrounds. There are people, from BAME communities. It's different religions. It's much more representative, and that makes it a really good place to work.
It does, and also the world is moving in that direction, and it's not going to stop. This idea of so my daughter's mother is Japanese, right, and she's a third culture kid.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like a third culture adult. I say this a lot. I really do. I spent my formative adult years in another country, and not even a Western country. So there's part of me that you can't see that feels very Japanese.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. And I feel that first country you spend a lot of time with, in that formative time, in your early 20s, for example, there's just a connection that is really powerful.
It's never going to go away. Never going to go away.
Definitely.
Okay, so late last year, the British Embassy and TDPK, True Digital Park, held a climate change hackathon, right? What was the impetus for that? And how do you think it went?
Oh, well, I think it went brilliantly. Obviously, it was fantastic.
Was it your idea? It must have been.
No, by no means was it my idea, but I was just really happy to come and kind of be part of it in a really, really small way. The impetus for it was the fact that we're really committed to tackling climate change, and I think we'll talk about it a bit later. But the UK has a particular interest this year with being the co-host of COP26. Right. But what we wanted to do was kind of look at what kind of practical things can you encourage people to do? We talk about it and it feels a bit sort of ideological. And
it's a little bit amorphous.
It is, it's amorphous, and it's also just too big. It's too big and too difficult. You see your polar bear image on a nice thing and think,
it's like, should I not use that straw kind of thing?
Yes, exactly. So the idea was to kind of, bring together sort of creative innovators with the ultimate challenge, which is climate change, and put them together and say, okay, what can we do in a practical way to tackle climate change? What amazing ideas do people have out there, and how can we support them to develop them to make a practical difference?
And it went well, you think?
I think it went really well.
Was it a full day? Was it a whole? Sometimes these hackathons are like 2 days in a row.
I'm not sure how long. How long did it go on for? It was 2 days. It was 2 days.
Where are my guys? Oh my God. Okay, so how does this fit in? I'm really curious just globally, right? There's obviously a British embassy system globally. How does the British embassy system look at climate change? What are they doing sort of as a team to combat climate change? And how does that fit in with COP26, which you've mentioned? Yeah.
We have climate change teams in most of our embassies around the world, and we have a presence in pretty much every country, one of the biggest diplomatic services there is. And here in Southeast Asia, we have an embassy in every single Southeast Asian country.
Okay. A full embassy.
A full embassy in every ASEAN country.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because we're really committed to Southeast Asia and to Asia as a whole.
Right,
And most of those places will have someone who is either dedicated to climate change and energy, or a part of their work is on climate change. And in preparation for COP26, we also invested in more and more people. So we have more people all around the world, including possibly helpful people behind me who then shout the word two, who come and support.
I can't count above 3, so if it's anything above that, I'm lost. But go ahead.
So we have lots of people who are working on this right now, and then we also then have funds to invest in projects and programs around the world, including through what we call the Prosperity Fund, which is a massive multi-million-pound fund, which helps look at how we develop sustainable economies.
So what does that mean? So the British Embassy, through the UK government, has something called the Prosperity Fund that allows you, in any place where there's an embassy, to invest in projects that are there?
Well, I think the Prosperity Fund, we for example, in Southeast Asia, we have a network here, and the Prosperity Fund has sort of different projects that come out of it, different programs that are active in different countries depending on what they are. So, for example, we have a sort of a future cities program, and part of that we're working with the metropolitan city of Bangkok to look at. What are we looking at? To look at sustainable urban economic growth. So, for example, that's something where we're in partnership with the local government here. But we also have other programs in Southeast Asia, for example, the Low Carbon Economy Program.
Okay.
And that's in 6 ASEAN countries.
Oh, wow.
And that's where we're looking to help those countries, support them transition to low carbon economy, working with them, but using UK expertise. So in clean energy, for example, and clean finance. So we're kind of trying to...
What's clean finance?
Oh, green finance, green finance.
Okay.
So, but that's where we're trying to kind of partner with the countries that need it the most, bring in our expertise so that we can kind of develop at the rate that's necessary, but in a way that's sustainable.
Is there a reason why... And let me tell you a funny story. My first time in London was when I was working for Morgan Stanley back in 1990. And I'd never been on a plane before. I literally went to Japan and then flew from Japan to London.
Wow.
No kidding. Yeah, we were very poor. Anyway, when I got to London, I sat down on the trading desk where I was working, and I said, I looked around at the guys, they were all guys, and I said, this is my first time in Europe. And they all said, no, it's not. Maybe that'll be next week because you're still not in Europe. But what I wanted to ask you was, without making the same mistake 30 years later, was why does it seem like Europe and the UK are so interested in climate change?
Why are we interested? I think because, well, there are a number of reasons. I think one, we see it's the right thing to do. We can see what's happening. We can see there's sort of there's a reason that things are changing. We can see things are changing for a start, right?
For sure.
So in the UK, I mean, if you were in the UK 20 years ago, you remember those sort of long rainy afternoons that seem to go on forever. Right. We don't seem to have them anymore. We're having these long dry spells. We're having less rain, but perversely, our summers are getting wetter. Things are shifting, and you can see
Getting a chill just thinking about it.
But it's true, right? Yeah, it's true. We can see that everywhere. You look at what's happening in Australia. You've got drought, you've got fires, but then you've also got floods and hurricanes.
Right.
Things that rapidly shifting. I mentioned sort of in a sort of flippant way the polar bears at the beginning of our discussion.
Right.
Those images are really stark.
Yeah.
And you can see the ice shelf. So I think people really feel it. And more than just feeling it, they think there's a moral obligation to do something about it. And secondly, you mentioned Europe and sort of the global West. We can do something about it, right?
Yeah, I don't feel like this is that hard of a problem to solve. To me, it is. It's very complex. It's very difficult, right? But it's almost like putting a mask on to stop people from getting COVID. Like if everybody, do you know what I mean? Like if everybody does it, everybody's better off.
Yeah.
So if everybody does a few little things to combat climate change, in that sense, it shouldn't be that hard to fix.
You would hope so, but it does take a lot of collaboration.
Absolutely.
And obviously, different countries are at different stages of development, and I think sometimes short-term investments feel more difficult.
Way more
for long-term changes.
Sure.
But it's collaborative, and that's what's really great about COP26 and all the COPs prior to it, is that it's the world getting together on the understanding that we've got to do something. We've got to do something together to be able to do this. And what was also great about the hackathon, as I said, was that it wasn't just sort of making commitments that feel sort of really far in the future, which is what it can sometimes feel like. It's about what can we do here and now?
Right now.
What cool stuff can we do here and now to make a difference?
What do we feel like the outcome? What's a positive outcome from COP26?
Well, what we're hoping for, our positive outcome, is that all the countries will commit to their contributions and to doing what they can to lower it. So, for example, the UK is committed to lowering emissions by 68% by 2030. So that's a huge amount, right? That's a big commitment. And if everyone does something like that,
right,
then we're really looking towards sort of, hopefully stopping the move, or stopping the rapidity of that climate change.
And do these things affect the Paris Agreement and like the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change? Is that part of the things that get discussed there?
That's part of the things that get discussed there.
Can you just explain to me? Okay, I get it. That's good though, touche. What was the impact of the United States pulling out of the Paris Agreement? And do you expect the new administration to come back in?
It was disappointing. I don't feel like it's desperately undiplomatic to say it was disappointing. I guess it was disappointing because the US is a global leader on so many fronts. People look at, and also a global emitter. So can make the most difference, both kind of in terms of moral leadership and also practical difference. So I think we're really hoping for a bit of a shift, and I think the initial indications are that.
I think we're going to go back in.
Yeah.
We're going to have to. It would be stupid if we didn't. But I want to make this point too. You made this really interesting comment earlier about the connection, like the deep cultural connections between what you saw in Europe and what you see in Asia. Right? There's a lot of cultural depth there. And yet if you just go across the ocean, and one of the reasons why I think is that there's always been a connection through the Silk Road to Europe and to Asia. There's been a ton of back and forth there. Like you can get amazing Chinese food in Rome. And I don't think that's a new phenomenon, right? I'm serious about this though, right? So I think there's always been that connection. The US is, in this weird sense, like very powerful, very strong, but very isolated. Two oceans on both sides and kind of friendly neighbors for the most part on both sides. They can isolate themselves so much easier in their minds. This is my perspective from being outside. I haven't lived in the US in 30 years. So they can be isolated more than countries in Europe and the UK because they've always been interacting. Fighting, getting peaceful, fighting, and the same thing in Asia. The countries are so interconnected, right? So for me, I'd love to see a positive outcome from COP26. I think it's really important, and I'd love to have the US come back into the Paris Agreement because, like you said, they're an emitter, and even though they feel self-sufficient and alone, the world just keeps shrinking, right, every day. And as we get closer and closer and more interconnected, you can't reverse it. That's what I think.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Anyway, so I want to get back to the hackathon a little bit, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Were there any great teams or high impact teams that you saw that were there? I wasn't there then. I wasn't there.
I wasn't there for the whole thing myself either, but we had some really, really awesome teams, and I met a few of them at the beginning, and then I heard a lot about them afterwards because my whole team was just really kind of pumped with the stuff that they'd heard. So, we had people who were looking at kind of gamification for protection of wildlife, and people who come up with sort of ideas to sort of use various chemicals to prolong shelf life of food so you don't have as much food waste.
Right.
But the ones that really stood out for us, of course, were our kind of winners and our sort of our top ones. And I really like the idea of some of them, and they really stick in your brain. So, for example, we had Sapiens who came up with a way of replacing styrofoam with kind of food waste stuff, so that styrofoam is a horrific thing.
Horrible.
Yes, stop using it for like carton. You use these ones instead. Be even better, right? If you had your kind of food waste containers. And then there was Leica that figured out a way to use insect protein for pet food.
Wow.
What a great idea. I don't want to eat it myself, but I wouldn't eat dog food either. But exactly. Pets are not very good for the environment. So at least if we can have a way of making sure the food that we give them, if you look at the fish trawling and so on that goes into making cat pet food, for example. I mean, it's terrible wastage.
Yeah.
We were very
also the cans that it comes in and all the packaging.
Well, that's true. That's true. A lot of packaging. We are a very learning-minded embassy at the British Embassy in Bangkok, and we had a former Achieving Scholar, so a British scholarship recipient, who came to talk to us recently about labour rights, actually. Okay. But one of the things that she mentioned in that was also we were talking about the seafood industry, and she was talking about how much of the seafood industry is done in an unsustainable way, and how much of that just goes into pet food, which just seems so terribly wasteful when you're thinking about it. So I had that in mind as well when we were looking at the winners and their pet food.
Pet food.
Yeah.
Really?
You're scraping the ocean to feed your cat. And I've got a dog, and we're getting a cat this weekend. So I am a bad person, but I should probably be getting in line to buy my cockroach cat and dog food, so that I feel a bit less bad about it.
Yeah, I never thought about that. So, is the hackathon something that you think is useful enough to continue to keep doing?
I think it is. I think it's a really great idea, because you come up with these. First of all, you generate lots of ideas,
right.
And through ideas, you generate enthusiasm, and you generate commitment, right? And we have people like you who are then talking about it, and hopefully people who are listening to it, thinking, "Well, it's a great idea."
People are listening, by the way.
But then we also want to kind of help support them, so it's not just ideas. And we have programs like our Global Entrepreneur Program.
What is that?
It's a UK initiative to help support tech startups around the world.
Around the world.
Around the world, including here in Thailand, to help them grow their businesses, scale up. With the idea is that if they headquarter in the UK, and then of course we can provide them with that fantastic ecosystem that we have in the UK,
right.
to help them develop that business.
Yeah.
So we have sort of ways that we can, like I said, we've got the ideas. We want to support the ideas, but we want to also make things happen.
Right. I'm interested in this fund, obviously. So my whole career at Morgan Stanley at Goldman Sachs was built on taking technology and making the businesses in which I operated more productive. So the whole tech startup thing to me is not something that's new. I invested in my first startup in 1998. Yeah, so it's a long time ago. But I'm curious from your perspective, based on your experience at the hackathon as well, and maybe even in comparison to what you see in the UK, what is your impression of the Thai startup ecosystem?
Well, I've just been here a few months, so I've only had a couple of touch-in points. One was one of our Global Entrepreneurship Program events, and one was the hackathon. Right. And I think what strikes me is just the level of creativity. Just like Thai startups are so creative and have such cool ideas, and they're ones that have clear applicability as well. So that I think is what's really fun about that sort of industry here.
Yeah, look, I think one of the great things about being in the startup ecosystem in Thailand is that there are plenty of gaps to fill.
That's true.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not, we would say in the brokerage business, it's not over-brokered, right? There aren't too many brokers. I mean, in Thailand for the stock exchange, for sure, there are too many brokers, but there's so many gaps to fill that it's great to see, and I'll call them kids, because most of them are kids, coming in and trying to fill those gaps. Yeah. And if you had been here back in 2011 and could compare what the startup ecosystem back then, when it was really just like a baby, to what it is today, the amount of sort of deep tech investments and also the social impact stuff that you're talking about, it's just like night and day. It's really been great to see.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, really great to see. Does this Global Entrepreneurship Fund have a social impact side to it?
That I don't know, actually. I don't know. I think we're mostly focused on kind of encouraging those startups to grow. And what we do is we kind of try and provide that kind of wraparound for them. So there's lots of mentoring, but also access to VCs and the private sector to kind of help them commercialize, get that kind of mindset, and just be able to grow.
Yeah, there've been some incredible stuff actually that's come out of Thailand for sure, and also out of the UK. So I follow the startup ecosystem globally.
Oh yeah.
And I have people that are deeply involved in the social impact space, because that's also very important to me. I mean, when you talk about climate change, you can't remove that from the impact investing. It just can't be removed. So that's why this thing is really interesting to me. So before I let you go, what do you think? You've only been here for a few months, right?
4 months.
That's okay. Sometimes first impressions are really important. What does the team think? No comment from the peanut gallery. But what do you think, just based on your initial impressions, but also because you've traveled all over the world, right? So you have a unique perspective working in all the places you've worked. Being born in California, what do you think is going to change the game for SMEs and for startups in Thailand? Like, if you think thoughtfully about this, just based on your experience and the good things you've seen in other places that maybe we can bring here and help startups and small companies.
Geez, well, from your experience, I feel like I should be asking you that question and getting some helpful tips from you. I mean, I think
happy to do it. But.
Yeah, that would be great. It seems like it's the things I mentioned, which is why that's the gap we're trying to fill as well. It's access to mentors, to mentors who understand and can give that perspective, and access to VC, and sort of linking those two things up and making sure there's a really good environment right from the outset to grow, and that it can move quickly and that it can adapt.
So one of the reasons why, and I think this is interesting for me, but one of the reasons why I started all these sort of programs, right, all the podcasts and all the video recordings, is because when we went to talk to venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, they would always tell us, that sounds like a great idea. We were pitching companies from Thailand, but also from Southeast Asia. And they would always say, that's a great idea, but we don't have enough visibility. on what's going on in Asia in general, but in Southeast Asia in particular.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why we do this. So I'm curious if you think that venture capitalists in the UK or in Europe either are or should be investing more into Southeast Asia.
Yeah, well, totally they should, and that's part of the point of things like our GEP, the program, is we match them up, right? So, for example, the event we had a month or so ago, you know, we did a lot of pitching, a lot of kind of speed mentoring and stuff, obviously kind of, via screen with people in the UK, and we have a lot of. We've had a lot of success with Thai and other Southeast Asian companies in going through this program and headquartering out of the UK and being really, really successful. So I think a lot of VCs in the UK do recognise that, and of course, we're like the number 3 in Europe for tech startups. So we know how to do this kind of thing, and we have people who are there. The whole ecosystem is there, and I think they're wise to the fact there's a lot of talent in Southeast Asia, and we look outwards, and that's one of the.
I hope so.
That's one of the.
Look, one of the reasons why I like to bring this up is because I look at this type of development like I look at war, right? In other words, in a very specific sense. In other words, if I'm from a different country than you, but I marry your cousin, it's very unlikely that I'm going to start a war with you because I don't want the rest of her family to die. And I think it's the same thing with investment. If I see investment from the UK into Southeast Asia and vice versa, and there's cross-pollination for technology and investment, what am I going to fight with you about? Because I want you to succeed. Even if I have to bring you back to the UK to do some of that, right? So that's why I like to talk about this sort of cross-country and cross-cultural investment. That's why it's important to me.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And if you look at that on a bigger scale, that's the reason why we are investing in Southeast Asia. That's the reason why you'll have seen that we've just signed free trade agreements with Singapore, and then also with Vietnam coming up. While we've got the beginnings of a free trade agreement with Japan, because we see that link between trade and peace, prosperity, stability, that sort of connectedness internationally. And that link that you were talking about is absolutely why one of the reasons that we're here.
I think and again, it can't go backwards. It just has to keep going forward, right? Like you can't stop being international. Anyway, I thought it was really cool. I'll let you go in a second, but I thought it was really cool that Davos is moving to Singapore for 2021. I thought that was super cool. And that kind of fits into this whole thing. Look, I really want to thank you for coming in and doing this today. Alexandra McKenzie, Deputy Ambassador at the British Embassy in Bangkok. You were awesome.
It's been a pleasure. It's been really nice talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.